Hi, everybody. Steve Wilder from Sorensen Wilder and Associates with you. You know, I hate to start any program out with an apology, but we were getting our podcast recorded in pretty regular timing in the last year and a half, even more so when COVID was active, I guess I should say, or maybe not active, but when COVID was in the forefront. And we slowed down. And I apologize to our listeners for that. I know there's a lot of you who like to follow the podcasts and stay abreast on what's happening in the industry. And well, yeah, I'm sorry if we let you down with the slowdown in getting these recordings out. Reality is we've been busy. We've been very blessed. We've been very busy. Our guest today will be, he's certainly experiencing the same thing, obviously. We're going to be talking today with a network partner of ours who is very well known in the cybersecurity industry. And as I was prepping for this show today, I really didn't realize just how critical cybersecurity issues are. But when I started doing some research, I came across some statistics, and those of you that know me know that I don't like to bore anybody with statistics. But, these just caught me so off guard because I was looking at this report, and this is a global average weekly, not just United States, but global average weekly cybersecurity attacks by industry. And the numbers kind of surprised me a little bit. And the report is looking at comparison between 2023 and 2022. But weekly attacks, education and research were the leading industry. They averaged 2,507 cyber attacks a week in 2023, and that's an increase of 15% over 2022. Second was government and military being subject to cyber attacks. That was at 1,725 per week, or an increase of 3%. Healthcare, which certainly is one that jumps out at me, healthcare averages 1,684 cyber attacks a week in 2023, and that's a 22% increase over the previous year. And, it just goes down in the hierarchy of it. After healthcare is the communications industry, finance and banking, utilities, retail, wholesale, insurance industry, leisure and hospitality, manufacturing. All of them are showing huge increases in the number of cyber attacks. The only one, and I guess maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, but the only one that showed a decrease was the software industry, which showed about a 5% decrease, but they're still sitting at 763 cyber attacks per week on average. So it is a very critical issue. It's costing millions, if not billions of dollars in the worldwide economy. And it's something that every company has an obligation to be taking into consideration and to be doing something about. And I guess I'll use that to kind of segue in and to welcome our guest today, a gentleman by the name of Shea Erickson, who is with Husky. And I'm going to bring Shea in here in just a second and let him talk more about his company and his operations and some of the major challenges that are facing companies with cybersecurity. But those of you that know Sorensen Wilder and Associates, you know that we don't try to be everything to everybody. And we're able to build a successful network because of the relationships we form with companies like Husky. Rather than try to hire experts in every field that's out there, we try to partner with reputable, recognized leaders in the different disciplines. So partnering and becoming network partners with Husky was just a natural blend. We've talked a lot with Shea over the last 6 or 8 months and just found his values to be so similar to those of SWA, his ethics to be that similar as well. And it's just really exciting to be able to introduce Husky as a new network partner to SWA, and to know that we are able to offer our clients and our friends the services of a recognized leader in the industry who's going to look out for their needs the same as SWA always has. So, Shea, I want to welcome you to the show. It's great to have you with us today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce Cyber Husky and talk a little bit about the background and the way this all got started.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. My name is Shea Erickson. I'm the CEO of Cyber Husky, and we work in the IT and cybersecurity industries. We kind of offer the whole gamut of cybersecurity services, all the way from initial audits and assessments of companies' posture as it stands, and offering reports and recommendations on that, to ongoing vulnerability assessments. We do a lot of managed cybersecurity services where companies will just entirely outsource to us. We 24/7 monitor their environments, respond to threats, take new regulatory requirements into consideration, and implement those controls into the environments. We have a 24/7 security operations center that's being monitored all the time, because these attacks are happening all the time, and quite frankly, it's only getting worse with all the new innovations in AI. It's just getting so easy for hackers to pump out attacks. It never ends. Usually, as soon as we stand up a new environment in the cloud, which is where we do a lot of work, we almost immediately in the audit logs can see attempts at compromising different network ports and stuff to gain access. So it's a constant battle, but we've had pretty good success in being able to make a big difference for our clients, and really help them improve their posture, maintain compliance with the regulatory frameworks that they're beholden to, like HIPAA, financial regulations, some governments as well. And we also do some IT project management. Very, very well experienced with the Microsoft stack. That's our tool stack of choice. So we fit really well with companies that also use those technologies. And just really thankful to be invited on here and share what I can with you guys, and hopefully help somebody out.
That's great, man. And like I said, I'm so excited to have you guys as a network partner with us. You're one of several network partners that we have, and all of them are small businesses that do some mighty spectacular things. So we're excited to have you guys partnering up with us. Obviously, you maintain your own independent autonomy, as do we, but it's so nice to know for our clients that we've got such a qualified resource. How did how did Cyber Husky get started? I know, you and I have talked a little bit in the past about it, but how about sharing with our listeners a little bit about how you started all this?
Yeah, well, I've been working in the technology industry for well over a decade now, personally, and I as do most people who start down that path, cybersecurity seemed really like a cool thing to get into, and so I started getting certified in some of the prevalent certifications out there, like Security Plus and Microsoft Security Engineer certification, and it kind of leveraged those things throughout the years until it came to a point that with COVID, where we're my wife and I actually were doing a lot of consulting for different companies through a company we worked with, and we were just so independent already that it just seemed like a natural move to maybe see if we could do something of our own. We did some kind of freelancing for a while, and it immediately went so well that we had to open up a company to just be able to accept payment and deal with all of the business framework stuff that goes along with that. And that was about 2.5 years ago now, and we've had steady growth since then. Almost all of our growth, we started to invest in kind of sales stuff, but most of our growth has just been through word of mouth through our clients, because we've just had a really good experience with a lot of our clients, and yeah.
And that's great. And it just, in my mind, that's one of the things that makes a perfect match when we talk about a network partnership between SWA and Cyber Husky, because you guys are like us in so many ways. You're a small business, you're family owned, it's you and your wife, your values, everything else there. And to me, that just it makes such a natural blend here. Let's talk about cybersecurity, and I'm going to start, Shea, at the most basic level, because you and I have gotten to know each other well enough now. I think very early on in our chats when we first met, I mentioned to you that I'm not a techno person. I'm the guy, if you come over to my house, my recorder is still flashing 12 o'clock. And unless one of my kids or grandkids comes over, it's going to stay flashing 12 o'clock. So, I'm going to start out at the most basic level. And I'm going to ask you, can you give an overview of what cybersecurity is and why is it critical for businesses, especially those in the non-tech sectors, like hospitals, nursing homes, schools, places like that?
Yeah, sure. So cybersecurity is security for all of your data. It's security for your bank account. It's security for it used to be, maybe you could say it was more specific to technology sectors. That used to maybe be the case. But these days, we all know everybody works on a computer. Everybody connects to the internet. Everybody uses some software tool, whether it's just for email or for banking or for payroll, whatever the case may be. For hospitals specifically, when you go into the hospital, how do you check in? Usually they hand you a tablet. Or if not, then you've got a nurse that's, entering your information into the computer, right? So what cybersecurity is at a really basic level is protection for all of those assets. Basically, if you imagine your business as being a house, cybersecurity would be all of the locks, alarm systems, or guard dog, all the things that you put in place to protect those valuables that are inside. And for companies, those valuables can be something that's super straightforward, like their money. I mean, it's very possible to get employees to use their credit card on things they shouldn't use it on and steal that money that way, or to simply actually compromise the bank account of the company. It's possible to compromise the payroll system and steal money that way. And almost equally as important, something that every company has is data. For healthcare providers specifically, it's patient data, which, your patients would not be happy if that information were leaked, or if that information were sold on the dark web, or if that information got out there in any way. And not only that, but of course you have the regulators and the auditors that are going to, hold you to certain standards. And if you have a compromise, if you have a breach, and it's because you weren't applying those standards, you weren't, up to regulation, then, you'll have some hefty fines to pay. You'll have to make disclosures that'll be very uncomfortable. And not only can it really damage your business and your public image and all those things, but for some businesses, it just takes them out completely.
Wow. And again, by my own admission, I've never tried to be anything I'm not. When it comes to cybersecurity, I have a classification I put myself in, and that is cyber dingbat or cyber dingoing. It's not an area of expertise with me. It's not an area I can usually carry on a very intelligent conversation on. What are some of the misconceptions about cybersecurity, and how does that transition into encouraging companies and trying to prompt companies to be more proactive in a cybersecurity program?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that it's not something that, the everyday person or everyday, small business needs to worry about. It's just the big businesses that have to worry about that stuff. There couldn't really be anything further from the truth. The bigger the business, maybe the bigger the fine they might get, or the bigger the payout the cyber attacker might get. And so we see these big numbers and think, oh, it's where the big stuff's happening. But the majority of compromises are happening at the small and medium business level because it's way easier to compromise them. Big companies have big budgets to spend on expensive consultants that can come in and implement controls. The best example of this, as you mentioned earlier, is that the tech industry has actually gone down on amount of cyber attacks, and that's because that's probably one of the wealthiest industries. They have plenty of money to spend on putting controls in place. But you really need to consider cybersecurity even as a small business. Now, there's a lot you can do, but being proactive is one of the best things that you can do, because I can assure you from experience that the cost of dealing with a breach after it's happened, to clean it up, to deal with the public image stuff, to recoup the money that you may have lost from a bank account hack or something like that, is going to outweigh what it would have cost you to just put some controls in place in the first place by an order of magnitude. I mean, we've seen it be as much as 10, 20 times more expensive to deal with the aftermath than it is to just put some controls in place. And plus, it's not that difficult. I mean, it's good to have somebody to guide you through that process. And that's a lot of what we'll do for our clients, or it's good to have somebody doing the ongoing monitoring. But even if you don't have a big budget, there's things that you can do that will make a huge difference. Just simple training and some simple controls will reduce the chance that you're going to be compromised or breached by sometimes into the 70-80%. So being proactive is really, really important.
Excellent. One of the things in our consulting practice that I see is, and I find this especially true with smaller clients, a mindset that, oh, we know it happens, but it won't happen here. And they've got a 100 different reasons why they don't think anything adverse can happen to them. We're a small town, we're a small facility, everybody knows everybody, blah, blah, blah. Do you see the same mindset when you're talking about cybersecurity with small companies?
Absolutely. Everybody thinks that they're too smart to be phished, for example. And it's they're certainly, and that's because I suppose that the majority of like phishing emails or phishing text messages that go out are bad English. They look like they're so easy to spot, but like those aren't the ones that are actually compromising people. Those aren't the ones that are causing the breaches. There's still plenty out there that look like they came from your boss and are worded just like them. There are plenty of smart cyber attackers out there, and as AI becomes more prevalent, this becomes easy even for the small potatoes hackers to be able to do as well. And you can't just be smart enough. There's controls that you need to be in place, because even the smartest people get tired, they get distracted, they get busy, and the controls that you can put in place are there to catch you when you just make a little slip up. It happens to everybody, and you can't assume that it's just not going to happen to you. The internet is a huge place that connects all of us across the entire world, and there's just too many people trying to do you harm out there to not take it seriously.
Oh, I feel like I'm listening to one of my own lectures, because that's so similar to the message I always try to send to our clients, that you can come up with all the reasons you want to, but at some point, if you're not addressing the situation and you're not approaching it from a preparedness point of view, you're going to end up approaching it from a mitigation or response point of view, and that's not where you want to be. When we talk about cyber threats, we hear about phishing, we hear about ransomware, insider threats, and stuff like that. What are some of the common types of cyber threats that you guys are seeing companies having to deal with or prepare for? And are there some more than others type of classification system, I guess I'll say?
Yeah. The absolutely the most common way that cyber attacks happen is through phishing, which is not FISH, it's PHISH, which just means basically, so the most traditional form of phishing is a phishing email. Somebody sends you an email, they pretend to be somebody they're not, or they try to get you to share some kind of information. So sometimes phishing might, the goal of a phishing email might be to get you to, hand over username and password. But also sometimes it just might be to get you to hand over some information, maybe about somebody else who works at the business. And then they're going to go phish that person, and they'll have a little more information this time, sound a little more convincing. And then they'll go for the higher class, username, password, whatever they're really getting at. And And I think a lot of people know what phishing is. It's a very, very prevalent form of cyber attack. The reason it's so prevalent is because it by far has the highest success rate, and it's the lowest effort. Like anybody can write an email, trying to convince somebody else to hand over the keys to their kingdom. It's not a difficult thing to do. And we've seen this happen to all sorts of clients. This is actually usually how it happens is phishing email pressures some new employee, pretending to be one of their managers or the boss or something, saying, hey, this is actually a real thing we saw, like last year, was the impersonator was pretending to be the employee's boss, and the employee had a company credit card, and they said, hey, I need you to go get me some Google Play gift cards for an event I'm doing or some such. And it seemed really stupid when we looked at it. Like we looked at the email and everything. It seemed so obvious, but they create this sense of urgency. And it was a brand new employee. They were nervous. They just wanted to make their boss happy, and they went and they did it. And it was like this was a small scenario, but I think it was probably about $1,000 was lost in actual cash. And then there's of course the training and all the aftermath that you have to do to make sure that nothing else has been compromised at that point. So phishing is one of the most common things that we see, and the phishing attempts out there are getting better and better. There's also different forms of phishing. So they've got a lot of funny names for them. I'll give you some of them. There's spear phishing, which is targeted phishing. So you're specifically targeting a specific person in the company. Maybe you know a lot about them, or they have some specific access that you want, whereas regular phishing would just be to send, emails like wide to a bunch of people at the company. There's whaling, which is to attack usually high-class targets like the CEO or other C-suite executives. And then there's smishing, which is SMS text message phishing. And the list goes on. There's, I think, vishing for voice message, but it's all the same concept. It's somebody pretending to be somebody they're not, trying to convince you to give up information that you should not give up. So that's a super, super common one, and usually is the starting point for more complex attacks that will come later. So one of the next ones that we see a lot of, and is an especially painful one for any company, is ransomware. And I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard this in the news. It has been in the news a lot. There was that big oil pipeline hack that was a ransomware hack that put basically the entire East Coast didn't have gas at gas stations for like several days because the Colonial oil pipeline they weren't able to operate it because they had no access to their systems because it had been entirely encrypted. So what a ransomware attack is a hacker gets access to your environment, and they slowly but surely will encrypt everything in your environment. So the most obvious thing would be files, right? Everybody knows you got Word documents and spreadsheets, and so they encrypt all that stuff, and they encrypt, your OneNote notebooks. They encrypt application files, so nothing works. You can't do anything, and you can't access any of your files. All that stuff that you spent years working on and building up, process documents and records and patient data, it's all encrypted. You can't do anything about it there. And then after they've done that, they'll put a message up on your computer screen and say, hey, we'll give you the decryption key. We'll give you a way to basically undo this if you pay up and hold it. So they hold the files for ransom. That's why it's called ransomware. And usually they'll ask for payment with cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or something. The thing that you should probably never do is pay them, because it's a crapshoot. Half the time you'll never hear from them again, and they will not give you the decryption key. And the other half the time you could be opening yourself up to legal liability from the FBI or some other United States government law enforcement. The real way to deal with something like ransomware is, and we can get into this some more later, is to have proper disaster recovery and backups and things like that in place. But those are probably the two most common types of attacks, and there's tons of other ones though too. We see 0-day hacks that are leveraging vulnerabilities that nobody has discovered yet. We see malware where somebody might just send an email with some attachment. Somebody clicks the attachment and it quietly installs some kind of spyware on the computer that will log keystrokes or record the screen and send that back to a command center somewhere where the attacker is. The list goes on and on and on. But definitely phishing and ransomware are the really, really big ones that we see. Insider threats are another one we do see. I would say it's probably of maybe medium with it's mediumly common, if that's a phrase I could say. Insider threat is basically somebody inside your organization or somebody who was inside your organization and maybe has been let go who does something. So sometimes it just might be an employee that's like, not very educated and doesn't know how they're supposed to be handling data. So they copy patient data onto their computer. They're not supposed to. This computer is a personal computer. It could be stuff like that, but it can also, and oftentimes is, something a lot more nefarious. Somebody's getting frustrated. They got passed over for a promotion. They're planning to leave the company anyways, and they want to do some damage. And there's a lot of damage they can do. I mean, they can just delete files. They can take files with them and start their own business with that, or they can take certain data and sell that, of course. And there is no shortage of people who are willing to pay for internal information from different companies. And of course, they could also do the really easily understandable one, which is to just steal the money. If they have, it's an accountant or somebody who has access to, payroll or invoicing or something like that, there's a lot of bad stuff that can happen there. And there are things that can be done to control for those risks, right? I mean, you can't not hire employees, but there are things that you could put in place to make that difficult for somebody to do.
Wow. My head is just spinning here because you're talking about so many things that, as I'm listening to you talk about them, the word common sense is coming in my head. This should be common sense, but it's not. It's stuff that I don't think people even think about. And as a small business owner, I can sit here and honestly say you're sharing things with me right now that we've never talked about internally here, but I can guarantee you in the immediate future, we're going to be. One of the ways that we try to stay ahead of what's going on in the security industry outside of cybersecurity, but for the type of services that we provide for our clients is, we're always looking for recent incidents that have happened, recent breaches that have occurred that can be a lesson learned, or maybe I should say a learning opportunity for us, so that we can learn what happened on that incident and bring that type of information to the forefront to our clients to help minimize the risk of any type of repeat event in one of their sites. Do you guys approach it the same way? I mean, do you look at case studies and lessons learned type of approach?
Yeah, absolutely. We honestly, a lot of the clients that come to us, I either have had something happen or have heard about something happening. They've heard about something in the news, and it's made them reconsider their current cybersecurity posture. I mentioned the Colonial Pipeline example earlier. That's a really, really big example that impacted many millions of people up and down the East Coast. But there are tons of other examples too. There was a hack at a hospital back in June of 2021. Kind of at the height of some of the COVID era stuff. So lots of people trying to use that hospital, and I believe it was in Toronto. They were hit with a ransomware attack. Now, we talked about that earlier, encrypting files and stuff. Okay, now you can access your files. But what are some of the real impacts of that on your day-to-day at your business, or in this case, hospital, which is no different in terms of the impact they can face than any other business. it took them more than 24 hours to restore any kind of access to most of these systems that were ransomwared. And they had to declare a code gray at the hospital. And the reason they had to do that is there was a loss of a lot of their essential services. And by the way, this company did act pretty swiftly in trying to mitigate it, but it's just, that's how quick it can happen and how much damage it can do. I think about 5,000 computers were affected, including many of those computers being used for handling patient records. And I believe they also had to divert ambulances from the hospital. They were able to continue with the surgeries they had on the schedule for that day, but there was a large degradation in some of the services they were able to provide. And of course, the regulators didn't want to have them able to accept ambulances, because who knows what's going to happen until that whole mess is cleaned up. And so there's a ton of impact in that first 24, 48 hour period. And then they started to regain some, but then comes the aftermath of that, right? I mean, if you're a patient that goes to that hospital and you hear about this, you're probably not going to feel like maybe the hospital is doing enough to protect your patient data, which you don't want out there. You don't want people to know about your personal health situation. And not only that, but I mean, can you imagine if you were in the middle of a surgery and all of a sudden all the computers they use to power a lot of the surgical equipment and imaging stuff just go down? I mean, would you want to be in that hospital? No, you wouldn't want to be in that hospital. And so there's just a lot of the impacts. Just, it's kind of like when you throw a rock in the water and you get all the ripple effects, right? It just goes on and on and on. Another example was a Wisconsin data provider for nursing homes had a breach back a few years ago. It infected something like 100 nursing homes and took out the electronic billing system they use, the payroll system they use, the patient record system they use, and I believe they couldn't accept new patients. They couldn't provide a bunch of services to their patients. They couldn't bill their vendors. Therefore, their vendors didn't want to do the things that they were supposed to do for them. And it was just a whole mess that those immediate, like, terrible effects went on for, I think, several weeks. And, obviously all the downstream effects went on for, I'm sure they're still experiencing public image stuff from that type of stuff. And so that's just a couple of examples, but we like to look at those and be able to provide kind of a after the fact holistic approach to how could this have been prevented, because a lot of clients will come to us and say, hey, I saw this company or this hospital or this nursing home that I feel like it's really similar to my organization, and they had this stuff happen, and I'm really scared about that. I really don't want that to happen to us. What can we do? And so we like to be prepared to be able to answer those questions and provide holistic solutions that will actually work.
Yeah, I keep thinking that old saying, follow the money. Yeah, and that's what's going on in my head right now. So much of this comes back to the almighty dollar.
Sure does. Yeah.
Wow. So let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk. Yeah, and you've done a great job setting a stage. I think everybody's already wheels are spinning, myself included. But let's talk about, as we talk about with our clients in every aspect of security, it starts with preparedness. It starts with recognizing that it could happen to you and taking the appropriate steps that you can. Maybe not, from a risk manager's point of view, there's different types of ways of managing risks. The one we always prefer is to avoid the risk exposure altogether, but that's just not possible in all these cases. So then we look at the second category, which is risk control techniques, ways that we can accept the risk, we can accept the vulnerability, but we can take steps to minimize the risk of something happening. And when I talk about that with my clients, we're looking at it from a non-cybersecurity, but even from a cybersecurity, what are some of the practical steps a company can take to improve its posture, its cybersecurity posture, if you will, to take away or to lessen the chances, maybe not eliminate, but lessen the chances of something happening, of a breach occurring?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Especially in this arena, there really isn't such a thing as getting rid of the risks, because in order to do that, you'd have to find a toaster from 50 years ago and use that to do your work, and that's just not something that people do. Everybody, it's always more worth it to use the tools and stuff out there. You just need to stay protected as best you can, and there is a lot that you can do. So some of the simpler but most important things and that have the greatest impact would be, number one, making sure that you're patching all of your systems, and you have to patch all of them. You can't leave one or two out there. If one of your C-suites, oftentimes we see it, especially with the CEO, they feel like it's cumbersome for some reason that they have to restart their computer to do a patch, or maybe they don't like the newest patch or something like that, whether it's for a piece of software or for the operating system. That's not acceptable. It has to be patched. You need to do this regularly. The more often you do it, the better, but I would say at least once a month, especially for bigger companies, we do once a month. But if you're a small company that can just do patches, especially security patches when they come out, then that's even better. So that's a pretty simple thing to do, especially in a smaller business where you don't have tons of different types of devices to manage. You can just implement some monitoring and management software and just make sure that those patches are being forced out to all of your endpoints. Another thing that's probably maybe the highest impact item on my list of best practices would be multi-factor authentication. So it's very easy to compromise a password, whether that be through a brute force algorithm, which again, think AI, like this stuff's getting easier and easier to do, or getting somebody to just tell you their password. It's so much easier than you think to trick somebody. We see it every single day. So what you do is you implement multi-factor authentication, which basically just means I have my username, so I enter my username. Then I enter my password, so I have that. That's factor number one, is the password. Then I have to enter a different factor of authentication. And usually the way we talk about this is something you know, something you have, and something you are the three categories of factors. And you want to have a factor from two of those three categories. So something you know, that would be your password. Something you have might be a hardware key. So if you ever worked at a company that gives you like a ID badge or a smart card, sometimes it might look like a little USB drive, but something that you have to carry with you. Another example of this would be, and probably the most common one out there that a lot of people use, which is a text message. So your phone would be something that you have. You have your phone, you type in your password, it then sends you a text message with a 6-digit or 8-digit code. You type in that code and then you get signed in. And then the something you are category would be things like something probably a lot of people are starting to become more used to, be like a fingerprint scan. A lot of us have that on our phones. Other options would be retina scan. That's something you probably haven't seen very much, but is utilized at some of the more secure facilities out there, maybe government and whatnot. So you pick two of those factors. It's always going to be something you know, most likely, which is your password. And then something you have is probably the easiest one to implement. A lot of software that you use has this capability. It just needs to be enabled, and you need to educate your users on how that works and how they can set up their code, or set up their phone, etc. There is a kind of a process to rolling it out. You should be cautious. You don't want to impede people's ability to be able to do their work, but this is easily one of the most effective things that you can do. And partnering with a organization that can really guide you on this stuff can make the process really, really smooth and not painful at all. Another couple good ideas. We talked about ransomware earlier, so make sure all of your data is backed up. This is something that's been talked about for a long time. I think most people wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that, but also I think most people don't do it, which is pretty wild. So, saving your files on your desktop only, like on your desktop or in your documents folder on your computer, like that's not acceptable. You should just not save files there most of the time. What you should do is get a solution like we're a big Microsoft shop, so I'll talk about Microsoft. There's Microsoft OneDrive, right? Save all your files in your OneDrive folders that are on your computer. From a practical perspective, it basically looks the same, and then they're immediately synced up to the cloud. And if somebody does get a hold of your computer, whether you lose your computer or somebody hacks your computer and is able to encrypt your files or something like that, well, you've got the cloud copy, and then you don't have to worry about paying a ransom. You don't have to worry about anything. We can just restore from the cloud copy, and we're good to go. That's kind of at a per user level, but of course you'd want to do that at a per system level too. So any servers that you may be running, you need to have appropriate backups and disaster recovery in place for those. And there's kind of a whole conversation that could be had about that at another time. But last thing I'll mention is this is not as common, but becoming more common, especially for the big kind of business platforms like Microsoft and Google and AWS, Amazon, right? We'll have options for detecting so-called risky sign-ins. Now, what that means exactly, it's really not important. There's just algorithms that will detect certain risk factors in sign-ins for your account. And what you can do is force password resets if somebody's detected as being a risky sign-in. That way, even if it's a false positive, it's not really that cumbersome for somebody to just have to change their password. But in case their account was compromised, then you reset the password and that compromise has hopefully been dealt with. So those are some of the main things that I would recommend from like a practical perspective. And then I'll mention one thing more, which is probably it's not a technical control, but it's probably the most important and effective thing that you could do. That's especially a not technical control, which is training. Cybersecurity awareness training is by far the most important, best bang for your buck thing that you can do, because a lot of times just making people be on their toes about monitoring for phishing emails and suspicious behaviors and stuff like that, it takes very little time. And you get a huge impact from it. And internally at our company, our cybersecurity awareness training program, we use once a week. We do a training video. It's a few minutes, and there's a short 10-question quiz afterwards. It's nothing super complicated. So that happens once a week for all of our employees. And then we also do phishing simulations. So basically, we have a team that sends out fake phishing emails that we're actually crafting those. And if one of our employees were to click on a link in one of those emails or respond to one of those emails or do something that they shouldn't have done with one of those emails, then we flag that and we tell them, hey, look, you did something you probably shouldn't have done. And so because this is the way that you fell for it, we're going to give you this specialized, tailored training plan that will help you to not have this happen again. And it's all very, very good. It's super effective.
I was just going to ask you about training your mind reader, because from our side of the equation, whether we're talking workplace violence, active shooters, security awareness, personal safety, street safety, whatever, training and educating this workforce, it has to be nonstop. And it sounds like what you're saying is the same thing here. It's not one and done. It's something that has to be done on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. It does.
I like what you're doing with the small video clips too. It's breaking it down into bite-sized pieces so people aren't sitting there listening for hours at a time. That's a great approach. When from our side of the security equation, having plans developed is critical. There's a lot of regulatory agencies that our clients have to deal with that require them to have written security management plans, safety management plans. And I'm thinking about cybersecurity when I ask this, but we talk all the time with clients about developing security plans. Is that applicable in the cybersecurity arena as well? And if so, how do you go about writing a cybersecurity plan?
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. You need to have a cybersecurity plan. There's a couple different components to one. The cybersecurity plan should probably be a part of your overall security plan, because your digital assets these days are just as important as your physical assets. The only thing being more important is, of course, your human assets. So the things that maybe you can start something very simplistic, but the further you go, you can get something really complicated. So let me kind of give some of the baseline. First thing you do is make an asset inventory. What are you trying to protect? Might be physical computers, might be software accounts, might be files, might be servers. So make an inventory of those things. And then you need to spend some time understanding what the risks are, what the threats are that are potentially going to come to you, and how likely it is for them to come to you. So for most small to medium businesses, this is going to be phishing, ransomware, malware, viruses, that type of thing. And then you need to plan for the defenses that you'll need to put in place. So we talked about those earlier. MFA, patch management, securing your Wi-Fi network would be a big one. Making sure that you have, at the very least, an anti-malware software installed, but even better would be like a endpoint detection and response, EDR software, or actually having a company monitor that for you would be very, very great. Some other more advanced measures might be firewall, intrusion detection prevention systems. I could go on, but I'll keep it basic for now. Then you need to write a component of your security plan that is the incident response plan. So this is like a super step-by-step, who's doing what, if something happens, who's doing what, how do they do it, down to the what buttons do they push, what steps exactly do they take. It's as basic as it gets. That you want a monkey to be able to read this thing and follow it. You will call out specific people's names, or at least departments that are going to be handling stuff, and you basically lay out like, okay, well, we've put this stuff in place to protect ourselves, but nothing's perfect. So if a ransomware attack does happen, how do we respond to that? What are we going to do? Well, first thing is we contain it, right? We need to separate any infected systems from the wider network. And we need to then make sure that we're kicking the attacker out, and then we can start working on restoring from our backups these files, so on and so forth. Then another component you should have is a regular maintenance and patching plan. So we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. A training plan for security awareness. And then the final component is how you're going to do regular vulnerability and risk assessments. So basically just auditing this thing from time to time. I'd say every 6 months would be ideal. I'll acknowledge that the vast majority of people aren't going to do that. Once a year would be really, really great.
Okay, great. If you called me up out of the blue and you said, Steve, this is Shea, we need an emergency preparedness plan written. One of the first things that we would do is a vulnerability assessment to identify what are the hazards that you're facing, both in terms of the likelihood of an occurrence as well as the potential severity if an occurrence takes place. When we talk about cybersecurity, can a company conduct its own risk assessment internally with minimal experts on staff, I guess I'll say? Do they need to go outside to get something like that done? And after it's done, how do you triage or how do you prioritize the outcomes of that assessment so you really know where your efforts need to begin?
Yeah, so you can do a basic risk assessment on your own, probably. But ideally,
I can't, but somebody could.
Yes. Well, you listen to a podcast like this, or do a quick Google search for a risk assessment checklist or something, and that'll probably be better than nothing. It's not great though. Really, you want to find an expert in this arena. We've already talked about, what can happen if you don't take this stuff seriously. So, when you assess your risk and then eventually work on putting controls in place to protect yourself from those risks. You want to be accurate and you don't want to miss anything. But, just assessing for some of the things we've already talked about here, like, are we doing patch management? Do we have MFA in place for all of our accounts? Do we have a security awareness training program in place? Like those types of things are kind of the basics of a risk assessment, and something that I suppose you could do solo. But there are a lot more other things, especially if you're beholden to compliance and regulatory frameworks. So in those scenarios, I would say you really shouldn't try to do it on your own, because the consequences of doing it on your own and being wrong or not hitting everything are really, really detrimental, potentially millions of dollars in fines, or we've already talked about some of the bad effects that can happen if something bad actually does happen to you. But once you have your risk assessment done, the way that should look is like, here's the things that we looked for, here's our findings, and here's our recommendations. And once you have all of that, you do need to go through, and there's kind of two sides to the calculation in terms of prioritization. There's which of these risks is going to do us the most damage, but then there's and do us the most damage and be likely to happen. Then there's also the side of the implementing the recommendation, right? How much is that going to cost? How much time is that going to take? And you have to balance those two things, right? If you've got something that's, medium, well, I'll say if you have something that's high risk of happening, high impact if it does happen, and it's going to cost you, pennies to put in place a control for it, that's obviously something that you should do immediately. But it's often there will be a few like that. There's always low-hanging fruit, but there's often a little bit more thinking that needs to go into some of these because they don't line up that nicely. And this is something that you should be doing really regularly. For our clients, we do like an initial vulnerability assessment is something we always do for a cyber client. Provide them a report and everything, and then we also offer a service that's ongoing vulnerability scans, and we do assessment for kind of the process stuff like patch management, security awareness training, other configurations that need to be put in place. But we also do vulnerability scans. We have tools that we use to do this for making sure that your patches actually are up to date, making sure that there is not bad configurations in your software or your server environment that's going to have a security hole in there. So basically hardening the environment. And we both will do the assessment and just provide the report and say, hey, here you go. You can do with this what you will. It's up to you. That's one thing that we're willing to do if that's what the client wants. But also we have another side to that coin where we actually provide the report, walk through it with the client, and then go and implement those controls, protect the environment, harden the environment.
You mentioned a couple of times, Shea, you talked about compliance issues. Can you share with our listeners an overview of some of the maybe more relevant cybersecurity regulations and compliance requirements that I'm betting some of them don't even know about? I mean, everybody in healthcare is familiar with HIPAA, and people try to apply that across all industry lines where it's not applicable across all industry lines, but there's got to be cyber regulations, if you will,
yeah,
for across different industry lines.
Yeah, I'll tell you that, people are starting to take cybersecurity a little more seriously, especially since COVID years, with everybody going remote, and just that made cyber attacks just go through the roof and how often they were happening. And so governments are starting to catch up and there's a lot of cyber compliance frameworks that are in the pipeline to probably become law in the next few years. Most of the frameworks out there right now that people are beholden to are industry specific, though some of them are pretty wide industry. I don't know if you could call it industry specific when you say healthcare, as there's many different types of healthcare companies. There's hospitals, there's nursing homes. We have a client, for example, that does document handling. They don't provide healthcare services, but they do handle patient data through a custom application, web application that they've developed. So there's a lot of different types of companies that can be beholden to that stuff. HIPAA is a really, really common one. HITRUST being a more stringent version of HIPAA, kind of. So that's a really important one, and one that can, at the very least, cause your patients or customers to lose faith in you if you are found to not be adhering to. Another one that probably a lot of people have started to see mention of is GDPR. That's actually a European Union regulation, but because a lot of companies are multinational, and will at some time touch some European Union citizens' data, which is what this regulation is all about, they're also beholden to that framework. It's a privacy framework. There's PCI DSS, which is for the payment card industry. There is SOC 2 Type 2, which is kind of a general. This is where you start getting to the more general, just like any industry could get this. SOC 2, there's SOC 2 Type 2, SOC 2 Type 1, SOC 1. There's a bunch of them. But basically what they are is you get an audit, and when you're done with that audit, you would get a certification if you meet all the requirements. And a lot of companies are starting to require this of each other, right? If we're going to work with you, we want to know, you're going to have access to our data. You're going to be get an account in our system to do some things. We want to know that you're SOC 2 certified. This is a super common thing we hear, and we've helped a lot of companies go through those audits, and dealt with the auditors directly, even to make sure that they're happy with all of the controls that have been put in place.
Early on in my career, I spent probably the first 20 years in healthcare risk management, and spent a lot of time working in the legal community. Not a lawyer, but certainly worked closely with a lot of attorneys in the healthcare system I worked with. And risk managers are always focused on minimizing the chances of an incident occurring, but then if an incident does occur, keeping the cost of that incident as low as possible, meaning how to deal with lawsuits. We're starting to see more lawsuits, it seems like now, dealing with failure to provide a secure cyber environment. I mentioned earlier the big healthcare breach that recently occurred with Change Healthcare, which is a division of United Health Group. And, I just recently doing a little bit of research, I identified 2 lawsuits that have already been filed in the last couple of weeks against Change Healthcare. One of them in Minnesota said the company is responsible for the data breach because it failed to implement reasonable security procedures and practices, and failed to disclose material facts surrounding its deficient security protocols in advance. So it seems like we've got a whole new area of plaintiff's law developing out there, and that we've got to, from a risk management and financial protection perspective, we've got to make sure that we've got ourselves in a position to defend these lawsuits as well. Are you seeing much in terms of lawsuits, Shea, coming down the pike because of allegations of inadequate or ineffective cybersecurity?
Yes. There are tons of privacy regulations out there these days. America is probably one of the places that has the fewest privacy regulations just for like the average consumer, but even America has a couple, and there's going to be, I think, in the next couple of years, like I said, even more of those. But almost every industry is beholden to some kind of regulation. We talked about some of them. Payment. Anybody who handles, who accepts a card for payment is technically beholden to the PCI DSS framework. You've got HIPAA and HITRUST for healthcare. Government's got all of theirs, and it's not just government, right? Like if you contract with the government, or if you're accepting government funding, which it's a lot of places these days, then you're beholden to those. And if you touch any of these frameworks, like if your business can be linked back to that in any way, shape, or form, then you're absolutely vulnerable to a lawsuit if you're not following the controls. And then it's kind of a double whammy, because if you're not following the controls, then you're technically supposed to, by law, I think, disclose that there's these issues, right? We have these holes in our security, and
Wow.
if you don't disclose it, then that's another lawsuit, basically. So it's kind of a minefield. And again, as I've talked about earlier, there are more complicated things that may need to be done for some of these regulations, but there still is so much low-hanging fruit, right? And the truth is, you're not going to get sued if you're not breached. Like the lawsuits happen after a breach. They don't happen if maybe you didn't have one or two kind of convoluted controls that are in one of these frameworks in place, but you never got breached because you had all these other things in place and were fairly protected, right? So just taking the first few steps is really the most important, and honestly will get you a lot of bang for your buck. And then from there, it becomes easier to take more steps anyways, and you start seeing the benefit in it too, the financial benefit. It's one other thing that I suppose I'll mention is, if you're not, and this goes for really any business, if you're not already getting cybersecurity insurance, you should talk to your insurance provider about adding that coverage to your insurance policy, because
That's what I was going to ask you about.
Yeah, that's something that absolutely is worth the money. It's, it has gotten a little more expensive since, again, COVID years, but it's worth the money and the peace of mind, right? It's hard to sometimes quantify the de-stressing or peace of mind from these types of things, but from personal experience and just from seeing so many clients, like having something to fall back on in case the worst happens is something that is well worth the cost.
Shea, I'm sensitive to the amount of time. I know you're a busy guy, and you're being so generous with the time, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Last thing I want to ask you about, though, and again, I use the same approach with your side of the security concern that I use with our own, and that is, we start out with preparedness, then we talk about response and mitigation, but the last part of it is, on our side of the table, is the part that always seems to get overlooked. Nobody wants to address it. Nobody really even thinks about it, but that's recovery and the aftermath. And if you don't think about it in advance, from our side of the table anyway, if you don't think about it in advance, you're just going to have a second crisis when recovery starts. Because if you don't know how, recovery is returning to some form of normalcy. And if you don't have a plan on how to do that, shooting from the hip is not going to be the right approach to take. With that being said, let's imagine hypothetically that a company has a breach, a cyber breach. They get through it. They take the appropriate steps. They're working with Cyber Husky or whatever the case may be. After it occurs, though, what are some of the immediate actions that they should take, and how do they communicate that with their stakeholders?
Yeah, having a plan for this in place is never a fun thing to have to imagine, but it's a really important thing, and you'll feel like it was pretty fun to do if you ever find yourself in the position of needing to use it, because having it is really going to be a lot better than not. So, the first thing that we would do is isolate the affected systems to prevent further damage. Then we kind of assess the scope and impact of the breach, take steps to eradicate that threat. So that's kind of like the first few things that would happen when we're responding to some kind of cyber incident. At that point, or maybe even during that, depending on how long that process takes, we'll want to start notifying any of the relevant stakeholders and authorities. So system owners, data owners, so that could be for a healthcare place, could be patients may end up needing to be notified there. And you need to talk to your legal team too, and this should be planned out ahead of who those parties are, because there are legal requirements about, like we talked about earlier, disclosing this type of incident to those people. Then you need to start getting the team together to put things back to normal. A lot of times you're going to end up having to restore computer systems to maybe a more vanilla state and kind of get things reset up. And then you need to have a process in place too of continually updating those stakeholders and say, so you can say, hey, these are the steps we're taking. Hey, we've taken these steps and now we're doing these few more things. Hey, we've done these things. Now we're going to see things start to go back to normal, over the next 7 days or something like that. All of that stuff is really important. But having the most important thing is to figure out what those things are long before a breach ever happens. Trying to figure this stuff out when everybody's in full panic mode, it just doesn't work.
Sure. It's amazing. As advanced as cyber technology is, the fundamental concepts of how you manage cybersecurity is so almost identical to the same approach that we take for non-cybersecurity issues, whether it's physical plant, personal safety, workplace violence, whatever. The approach is so similar. Shea Erickson, you're incredible. I can't thank you enough. I can't tell you how excited we are to be in a network partnership with Cyber Husky. I know that our clients are going to love what you've shared with them today. And I just can't thank you enough, brother. You guys are incredible. What you and your wife have built in such a short period of time is something that I hope you are as proud of as you should be. And you're serving such a great need, and that's so much of what it's about. And I talked earlier about values and ethics and serving the need that's there and doing so in the way you guys do so. It's just so impressive. I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate those very generous compliments. Yeah, I just hope that the information that I've shared here today can help some companies get on the path that maybe they're not on yet, and start putting some of this stuff in place, and maybe prevent a breach soon. We really enjoy the business aspect of running our business, but the helping companies part is probably the more satisfying piece.
Yeah, especially when you get those calls afterward that said, "Hey, we had this attempt and it failed because of what you did for us." That's always such a great feeling.
Yes, absolutely.
It really is. Shea Erickson, thank you, my friend. Guys, if you have questions for Shea or want more information on anything he's talked about, reach out to us here at SWA. Easy way to do it, two easy ways. You can email us at SWA, the number 4, and the word safety.com, or you can give us a call at 815-933-5977, and we will get you the information that you're looking for, the answers to your questions. Again, Steve Wilder with Sorensen Wilder and Associates. I appreciate so much all of you being with us. We're getting ready. We're already laying down the plans for our next podcast. It's going to be one that I'm not looking forward to, and I think that's the first time I've ever said it, but we're going to be talking about how to deal when you have the unthinkable event of a line of duty death of a security officer. So we'll be talking about that again from a preparedness, response, and recovery point of view. And we'll be talking with one, if not a couple, of security administrators who have had to deal with such a tragic incident. So until then, stay safe, stay in touch, and thanks, everybody.